Thank you for coming up from the beach for our LC session. This is meant to be a great session. So I'm very excited to introduce our speaker tonight, Winter Mason. Winter got his PhD in social psychology and cognitive science in 2007 from Indiana University, and his postdoc in human and social dynamics at Yahoo. He was then an assistant professor at the Stevens Institute, and then in 2013 he moved to Facebook. And that was actually the year that I met him. We were both in Bali, Indonesia for a meeting, and so we only see each other in really exotic, kind of tropical locations. But when we were there, he had given a talk on some of his work that he was doing in Twitter research while he was at the Stevens Institute. And then we were on this very long bus ride, and he was asking me all kinds of questions about Pinterest, because he was doing Pinterest research at the time, and I was kind of really into Pinterest at the time, so it was very exciting. And he had said he was moving to Facebook, which I was also, and still am very into Facebook. And I've been trying all week to find a video that I have of him. While we were in Indonesia, they were teaching us Indonesian dancing, and so I have a video of him on stage learning this dance. And all of my Indonesian pictures on Facebook do not include Winter, because he was just about to start the job and said, "Do not post these on Facebook." And so I couldn't find them. They're probably on my computer at home, but there is a video. If I find it, I will circulate it. I have Tiffany's email, and Tiffany has all of yours. So thank you for coming to PSB. I have our traditional PSB gift. You can go home and tell everybody that you got laid in Hawaii. There you go. Thank you for coming. And enjoy, everyone.
Thank you, Marilyn, for inviting me. This has been a really excellent experience, and thank you all for actually coming up from the beach to this dark room to hear me talk. Hopefully you find it worth it. So the title of the talk, as you see, is Public Health Information in Social Networks. However, when I was designing this talk, I wasn't really exactly sure what the audience was going to be. And so I left it with this sort of ambiguous title, and it's ambiguous in this particular way. Am I talking about public health information in social networks, meaning online social networks like Facebook and other social media? Or am I talking about public health information in, for instance, offline social networks, right? And today I'll actually talk about sort of both of those aspects. And when I was thinking about this, I thought that there were sort of two key questions that we have to ask in order to understand what can even be known about public health from social media. And so the first is, why do people share online at all? And how does this affect where and what kinds of health information people are likely to share? So why are they sharing? And then what influences their behaviors? What influences public health behaviors? And where do social networks and social media fit in to influencing their behaviors? So I'm going to start with the first question, why do people share? And for this part, I'm going to start with a fundamental question about communication that was asked about 50 years ago by this guy, Laswell. And the question is, who says what in which channel to whom with what effect? Okay? And this single question actually sort of captures all of communication and media research. And so there's, because it captures all of the key components in a message. So who, the source, says what, the message, in which channel, the medium, to whom, the audience, with what effect, the outcome or consequence, right? So those 5 components capture all of the relevant aspects of a communication. And this is true, this question was asked in the time of radio and newspapers, but it actually is still a good question to ask when it comes to social media. Now, the original question was, if you asked Laswell, he would probably say that social media fits into purely the analysis of the channel, all right? Purely the analysis of the medium by which the message is happening. However, because social media is so much more than simply a communication medium, it actually constrains things like the content, the actors, and the audience. And so, in fact, we want to ask this whole question with respect to social media when we want to understand what people are sharing and why they're sharing information at all. So I'm going to drill into this and say, okay, here are the four components. So the communicator, who am I to be sharing this information in the first place? Who am I? Second, what kind of information is being shared? Who is actually hearing the information? Who is the audience, intended audience for the information? And then what is the general social context for this information being shared? So with the communicator, when we're asking who am I to be sharing this information, what do I mean by that? Well, one of the key parts is self-identity. So there's some people that are just sharers. I'm sure you've met them. You kind of want to just say TMI, right, all the time, right? Because there is a disposition towards sharing. And so some people, regardless of the context, regardless of the medium, whatever, they're going to share this information. It's just a dispositional trait. Sometimes it's not so much the self-identity, it's the group identity, right? So I actually belong to a group of people who shares this kind of information. I am an academic at an academic conference, therefore I identify and I'm going to share the information about my research, right? Another thing that's very important and sort of more particular to social media is the visibility of the identity. So sometimes you want to share this information because your identity is visible. You want people to know that you have this information, and that is the reason that you're sharing it. Other times, you specifically only want to share because your identity is not known. I feel comfortable saying these racist comments because nobody knows who I am, and they can't attribute it to me. Another thing that's important is sort of your self-perceived authority or competence in the information that you're sharing. So earlier today, we heard this talk about understanding adverse drug reactions from Amazon reviews, right? Well, in this case, the people that are sharing might be sharing because they have this perceived competence that other people do not have, where that competence is the experience with that product, right? So they're like, okay, I have the authority and competence that other people don't have, and that is going to be my reason for sharing this information. When it comes to the message, what kind of information is being shared, the things that we want to look at are things like, is it evidence-based? So are people kind of sharing this information because it is drawn from facts or apparent facts? Is the information self-disclosing? Is this revealing personal information about the source? Is this information affect-laden? Is it affective? So sometimes people share things just because they pull the heartstrings. Cat videos are so popular on the internet, right? Because they pull the heartstrings, right? This is the information that's being shared. And it's also worth noting, and I'll kind of touch on this later, that when you look at persuasion, there's actually literature that shows that it's important to have matching between the message and the attitude. So if the attitude, that a person's attitude towards smoking, for instance, if that's cognitively based or where they think it's rational to smoke for whatever reason, or if it's affective based, like it's cool to smoke, then the persuasive message should match the context of it. Is it evidence-based? Is it fact-based persuasion? If you smoke 20 packs a day, or if you stop smoking now, your lung will be completely new in 7 years? Or is it affect-laden, where you show them horrible pictures of diseased lungs, and this really grabs them, right? And so what message is going to be persuasive is actually dependent on whether the information is evidence-based or affect-laden. I also want to, in talking about the message, this is research by some colleagues, Moore Nauman and folks from Rutgers, or formerly Rutgers, who analyzed the content on Twitter. And what they found was that a lot of the content was classified into things like opinions and complaints, statements and random thoughts, or what they called me now, which is just things like, I had lunch today, right? I'm at a great conference. That's also me now, right? And only a smaller portion was actually information sharing. Now granted, and this is something to keep in mind kind of going forward, this was back in 2010. Probably the data was collected in 2009, and the norms around Twitter have probably changed. I would bet that if they redid this study, you'd actually see a lot more information sharing relative to the rest. But you're still going to see the emotional content, the me now content, the stuff that is affective and self-disclosing on Twitter. So that information, people are sharing this kind of content on Twitter. The third thing is the audience. So who will be hearing this information? And this is not about the actual audience of the message. And this is important to keep in mind when it comes to going in and actually mining the data from Twitter. It's not about who is actually able to see this message. It's who is the intended audience, because that will tell you a lot more about what kind of information is being shared and why it is being shared. So one of the things that is very important on, when thinking about the intended audience is the person's perception of trust. And by trust, I mean two things. The first is interpersonal trust, which is to say, I trust that if I disclose this information, you will not use it against me, you will not violate my feeling of self, you will not cause me harm in some way because I shared this information. But there's also professional and authoritative trust. So if you're talking to your doctor and you expect some response and that reply is, or if somebody tells you, I think that this is your problem, you have to trust that what they're saying is factual and that they have the authority in this subject. Going back to the Amazon study, you read those reviews, you trust that the person that is sharing that actually had the experience with the drug, and so that is the reason why you take that information as being valid. And in fact, the people that are sharing it because they have the perceived authority are probably only doing it because they know that other people are going to trust that they have that authority. Another very important part when it comes to the audience is what's known as social capital, and I don't know how familiar the people in this room are with that term, but social capital is effectively the value that we get from interpersonal relationships. Okay? So there's two kinds of social capital in the literature. The first is bridging, which we can characterize as the strength of weak ties. This comes from Granovetter's classic paper in which he showed that when we go out looking for new jobs, for instance, or when we're going and looking for new information, this tends to come through weak ties rather than strong ties. Because the strong ties, the people that are close to us, our family and our very close friends, we're talking all the time. We all know the same information. We are all, currently aware of the same jobs. When you hear about that job in that, university that you didn't know existed, which, by the way, is how I got the job at Stevens, it turns out that, it's this weak tie that connected me to the people at Stevens, and that sort of made that job opportunity real. And so that's bridging social capital, and that illustrates the value that I'm getting from this interpersonal relationship, right? Bonding social capital is the strength of strong ties, right? So when you need to go borrow $100 from somebody, right, or you need social support because you've just gone through some lifelong tragedy, the people that you turn to are your close ties, or your strong ties, or the people that are important to you. And that value that you get, that emotional support, that financial support, that just general life support, comes from your strong ties, and that is bonding social capital. And so there's research that shows that sharing personal information, it usually is intended towards the strong ties, towards the people that you feel close to. But B, that can actually increase this bond just by the act of sharing this personal information. That increases the bond between two people and actually can be leveraged in the future or has this return of social capital. And so a lot of times when you see people sharing personal information, it is because, or it is a function of this social capital. Another thing that's very important is the visibility of the audience, right? And so people may choose to disclose or not disclose personal information about themselves based on misperception of the actual audience, right? So on Twitter, I'm sure you all, if anybody has ever actually gone on and just done a random search of Twitter and just looked at like random tweets, right? A lot of the times you'll encounter things that you might personally think, why would anybody ever share that information on Twitter, right? And the reason often is that there's a sort of a misalignment between the perception of who they think they're sharing to, i.e. their followers, and who can actually receive that information, i.e. everybody, right? And in fact, some colleagues at Facebook, and Stanford, Michael Bernstein, Eitan Bakshi, Maura Burke, and Brian Carr, did this study in which they actually delivered a survey on Facebook to a bunch of about 1,000, or maybe it was 2,000 Facebook users, and asked them, okay, for a specific post, sometimes it was tied to a specific post, so they said, okay, for this post, how many people do you think will see this post? And sometimes they would ask, just generally, how many people do you think see your posts in general, right? And this scatter plot over here, oh yes, I can walk. Oh, actually, I have a pointer. Okay, so this is, so on the y-axis is their perceived audience, right? On the x-axis is the actual audience. So they work at Facebook, they could actually see for this post how many people actually saw this post, right? And what you'll notice, and this line would be perfect alignment. If all of the points were on this line, then everybody would know exactly how many people were going to see their post, right? But what you'll notice is that most of the mass is actually happening underneath this line, which means that people are sort of underperceiving the number of people that are going to see that post. So, you know, they think that about 20% of their friends are going to see it, when in actuality, maybe 40% do. When it comes to, and that's for a specific post, for this particular post. When it comes to just in general, it's an even bigger misalignment between the actuality and the truth. And so this sort of misalignment can be problematic in terms of self-disclosure. It can be useful for when you're mining Twitter and you want to understand adverse health effects, but that raises the ethical questions that I think this session is about. The fourth thing that I want to mention when it comes to audience is responsiveness. So it's very important for people when they're choosing to share information online or in general, whether they are expecting a response from somebody, and if so, what kind of response, right? So when you share on Reddit, the response that you are hoping for is upvotes, right? When you share on Facebook, the response that you're hoping for is likes and comments, right? And in general, when you're sharing, you want feedback of some sort. Sometimes it's not expected. Sometimes you're sending the email to your congressperson, and the simple act of expressing your voice is sufficient to kind of, that's the whole end goal. But often a response is expected, and understanding that that is a motivation for sharing information is, again, important when you're thinking about the kinds of information that people are sharing on social media. So the final thing that I want to talk about is the medium, and so this is the channel. This is what would traditionally be analyzed, social media would be analyzed. And so there's a couple of parts of the medium that I really want to highlight. So the first is the social norms about information sharing in the medium. And so the questions here are, what kinds of information are generally shared on this site, on Twitter, on Facebook, in newspapers? And then who is sharing what kinds of information, right? So a good example of this is, talking about politics might be taboo on Facebook, right? Your family is on Facebook. You just don't want to get that, you don't talk about politics at Thanksgiving dinner. You don't talk about politics at Facebook, right? I'm not saying this is true. I'm just saying hypothetically. Whereas talking about politics on Twitter might be totally welcome and even expected, right? And so understanding this, what are the norms of the people in the particular medium are going to determine what kind of information is being shared and who is sharing that information. The next is the question of what elicited the information sharing, right? So why is this person sharing the information in the first place? Sometimes it comes from an information request. Somebody said, hey, I really need some help with this problem. Can you help me out?
Maybe the person perceived a need. So again, with Amazon reviews, like I feel like I can help people out by sharing this information. And then there's also social norms around sharing a particular kind of information. So, for instance, in another talk, there was a fitness app, and people were actually sharing information about their fitness app. Well, the reason that they might be sharing that particular kind of information is because they want the social pressure, right? There's a norm that when you set a weight goal and your friends see that you've set this weight goal and see your progress along it, there's an expectation that your friends are going to push you in the right direction. So what I want to do now is sort of take this structure, this framework, and sort of look at 4 different sites, and you'll see what I mean. And then I'll take that and ascribe it to some research that's been done on these social media sites. Right? So Google isn't exactly social media; it's a search engine. But I think that it can still be looked at from this perspective. So the communicator, when it comes to typing in your search in the search engine, your identity is not really relevant, although it may be revealed through your searches. Your authority on the subject is also irrelevant because there's not exactly, it's not important whether you're an expert or not. The message is just simple search queries. It's not full text. Sometimes people actually still do the Ask Jeeves things and type in a full question into the Google search engine, but often it's just a set of keywords and that's about it. There's no perceived audience, so there's no relevant social capital, but there is some implicit trust in Google, right? People are sort of implicitly trusting the fact that Google is a trustworthy source where they can, type in whatever they want, and it's, at least from their perception, anonymous and so forth. And the context here is just specific information seeking, right? So this is a very, no audience, no really relevance of communicator. The messages are very simple, and the context is information seeking. This is the motivation behind typing in queries into the Google search engine. Let's look at this at Twitter. Okay, so on Twitter, the identity is constructed. That is to say, you can have a pseudonym. There is a fake Donald Trump, right? It's a constructed identity. Sometimes it's real, but sometimes it's not. Authority is absolutely valued on Twitter, right? So people absolutely share on Twitter because they have information and they feel that they are authoritative on this information and they want to share it. The message, because of the 140 character limit, it actually constrains the type of information that appears on Twitter. So it pushes the focus to these off-site content. So URLs are widely popular in Twitter because of this 140 character limit. And then it also pushes kind of the way that the type of content that is shared to this very pithy, very concise information. When you're able to make a big point in 140 characters, that's highly rewarded on Twitter. Those are the things that are most popular and most viral. Now the audience, as I kind of alluded to earlier, this can be from friends to everyone. Some people perceive, and you look at the social media marketers on Twitter, and they absolutely perceive that everybody is going to, and kind of hope that everybody will see their messages, whereas other people on Twitter kind of have the perception that it is just their friends, and that is their audience. And so who is sharing, right? This is again, where it becomes important. Who is sharing what information depends on whether they're seeing the audience as being just their friends or whether they're seeing the audience as being everybody. And again, the responsiveness of the audience is very valued. People very much try to get the retweets and the likes. That's something that's sort of rewarded implicitly on Twitter. And then finally, the context. The content has this perceived permanence in the sense that it's not Snapchat, but transient relevance. So, it's got a very fast life cycle. People expect that when you share something on Twitter, it might still be around forever, but nobody will care after a day, right? It's also really widely varying in terms of the norms in the social context because there are actually different communities in Twitter. So there are some people that are going to be sharing with particular hashtags about some, very revolutionary global topic. Some people are going to be talking about something that is hyper-local. And in fact, the context is very difficult to understand except when you're looking at a slice of Twitter. Facebook is actually very similar on a lot of these points. One of the key differences is actually with communicators. So the identity is usually real. Group identity is relevant, so a lot of people are there because of their networks or their school or that sort of thing. But there's much less emphasis on authority. It's generally just, you're sharing baby pictures, you're sharing life events, you think that your family is there. Pretty much any media in terms of photos or whatever, there's no length limits, these sorts of things. And so that also affects the kind of information that can be shared there. The audience tends to be family and friends. Most people think it's family and friends. There are some people that use it for public sharing, but primarily it's family and friends. And again, people want the likes. There's absolutely this perception on Facebook, this is another way that it's different, is that people don't only think that the content is permanent, they think that it's permanent and forever discoverable. And you talk to teens about posting on Facebook, and they discover that they really feel like what you post on Facebook is there forever. How many people here know of Reddit? All right, excellent. One thing that's interesting about Reddit is that, as opposed to the other sites that I've talked about, anonymity is absolutely the norm. And I mean that in the strong sense of the word. So this is a study by Sean Taylor, Lev Muchnick, and Sinan Aral. Now, they insist that it was not Reddit, that is a Reddit-like site, but we'll just say that it's Reddit for the sake of argument. And what they did is they actually did a randomized experiment in which they took the same post, and sometimes they had identity tied to it, and sometimes it was an anonymous post. And what they actually found is that when an identity was present, you were much more likely to receive a downvote, right? So people actually, and generally the idea is that, oh, I know who this person is, and I don't like their content, so I'm going to downvote it, right? Whereas when it was anonymous, it was sort of immune from that harm. So on Reddit, the norm is absolutely anonymity. And this, again, kind of constructs the nature of the content on Reddit. When it comes to the message, there's this norm, there is a norm of, you're keeping your content within the context of the particular subreddit, but otherwise pretty much anything goes. And the other thing that I think is interesting about Reddit is the perceived audience, right? So anonymous is rewarded. People expect that it is these, anonymous users and pseudo identities. But the responsiveness of the audience is supremely valued, right? People really want those upvotes, and they go to ridiculous lengths to get them. But it makes for a very interesting and different dynamic in terms of the content that's available on the site. And as I said, there's very strong norms around upvoting and downvoting. It's sort of the completely useless currency that drives the front page of the internet. Okay, so you see just sort of from this analysis how these sites differ and how these differences might be relevant to the kinds of content that you could find if you were going to mine these sites for public health information. Right? So when we look at, for instance, this classic study that you all are aware of, Google flu trends, they found this correlation between flu-like symptoms and queries for flu-like symptoms and the actual measurements of influenza reports. Now, another study even found this was true also with H1N1. Of course, subsequent studies showed that there was that these initial studies sort of overestimated the correlation because it was influenced by outliers and this sort of thing. But I think that sort of lack of correlation can be explained to some extent by thinking about the motivations behind the people that are entering the search queries, right? So one of the notable examples, one of the notable outliers came from the fact that flu was very much in the news. And so people were searching because they wanted to understand the news and not because they were actually experiencing the symptoms themselves. And so understanding that this is the driver for the correlation in the first place, that people are entering in these search terms because they are experiencing the symptoms, also helps you understand why it failed and perhaps could have been sort of foreseen just on the basis of analyzing the motivations behind the content that is being analyzed here. I'm going to talk about 3 studies kind of in combination. So this first one is some colleagues from KAIST. They surveyed 202 Facebook users, including a standard measure for depression, and looked at and got them to sign in with Facebook so they could look at the behavioral correlates, the Facebook behavioral correlates with depression. And what they found was they found significant correlations when it came to the number of friends, the number of inbound likes, that is to say how much of their content got likes, and the number of both inbound and outbound comments, so how many comments they received and how many comments they made on other people's posts. Another thing that's sort of unfortunately correlated was just fewer friends on Facebook was also correlated with higher depression scores. In another study, including one of the Mia Cha and Park, they looked at Twitter. So again, thinking about this study, these users, there's no sharing going on here, right? They're not looking at the information that they're sharing. They're just looking at their behavior on Facebook. Right? They're not looking at, the information that they're looking at here is things that are completely unrelated to kind of intentional information sharing. So just, how much are you liking things? How much are you commenting on things? And that's actually an advantage of this study, right? Is because it to some extent, obviates the need for understanding why people are sharing, because this isn't about sharing, it's just about their behaviors. In this one, when they're looking at, they look at this on Twitter. So what they did is they actually grabbed 1,000 tweets that contain the word depressed or depression. And the thing that was interesting to me and relevant to this talk is that they actually found people that were self-disclosing information about illness and treatment. And the reasons why are evident from the content analysis that they did. So they took these 1,000 tweets and they did a standard qualitative content analysis. And found that a lot of what they were talking about was people talking about their depressed feeling, talking about their symptoms, talking about their treatment in general, using Twitter as a support group, right? And so the fact that they were expecting a response, that they had this perceived audience of other people that were experiencing it, and that they felt that they were going to be increasing their social capital is the reason why they were sharing this information. They then could, because they had this, they actually then found some individuals. They sort of used the method that they had done in this study and found some Twitter users, scored them on depression, and then kind of did text analysis on their tweets using Luke and found anger and having fewer references to friends, which I thought was interesting. So less language that involves my friends or my colleagues, these sorts of things, were correlated with depression. And so again, it seems like the reason why people are sharing this information has to do with the support that they're looking for. But it's worth noting that this is going to suffer from the same problem as the Google search one, because there are going to be other people talking about the number one, the most common thing that they found was just basically pharmaceutical companies and this sort of thing trying, selling wares. Are you depressed? I'm sure you've all seen those ads, right? And so this, while it is true that you can identify some people that are really sharing this legitimately, it's going to be in this context of a lot of other information that is not what you're looking for. A third study that looked at depression in social media is by Moonmunda Chowdhury, Scott Counts, and Eric Horvitz. And what they did is they actually had essentially no ground truth in this study, but what they did is they found women that had a child. They talked about having a child on Twitter. And then they just looked at, okay, so this is the date that they had their child. Let's look at their behavior on Twitter before and after. And what this plot shows is each line is a woman's activity on this measure, where the central line is basically when they had the kid, right? So some women, in this region here, this volume is just the number of tweets that they did, right? So in this region right here, there was basically no change, just didn't really tweet a lot before and after, but some went from tweeting a lot all the time to absolutely not at all, and some went from not tweeting at all to tweeting a lot. And you can actually see this, so the same line kind of carries across. So these women, this one set of women got very active, after they had their child, and this set of women down here got very inactive after having their child. And so what they showed is that they had this classifier, so basically prior to a woman having a child, they actually could predict with 71 to 83% accuracy whether that woman was going to experience a large change in their Twitter behavior. Now, does this mean that the women were depressed? No. Is this a signal that could be used? Quite possibly. And this is another one that shows this kind of nice benefit of using their behaviors rather than their language, or rather than the information that they're sharing. So when we're looking at this, the question is, who is sharing information about their own depression, right? Some of this is going to come from the sharers, from the people that just share about everything, right? Some of it is going to be people that are looking for the community support, that are looking for the social capital. What are they sharing about their depression? You know, are they sharing their symptoms? Are they sharing their treatment? You know, some of this is going to be there, but some of it is going to be masked by the people that are not, or the Twitter accounts that are not actually depressed people. For the people that are actually sharing, what is the audience? So some of them, you know, some of them, they think that the audience is people that might buy my, you know, bad, you know, useless drug, and other people are actually the people that are looking for support and believe that they're receiving that support. And so really, you know, understanding what is the context for sharing. So this actually, you know, taking this approach, I would argue that it might be worthwhile to look at, for instance, a subreddit that is focused around depression, and use that as the way to look at how people talk about depression. What is the language that they use? How can I identify real language around people that are depressed? Because basically by opting into this group, and because of the social norms in this group, you're going to have a much better ground truth. And so when you're asking these questions, you know, what you want to understand is, how is this biasing the data? When I'm mining and looking for information around depression, how do these objectives, how do these questions, you know, the people that are sharing, the kind of information that they're sharing, how does that bias the data that I'm getting? Because that is going to affect, you know, all of the conclusions that you reach when you do this research. I had one other point about mining information in social media, and this is false information, right? So if you've ever done any social media mining, you know that the online data are very noisy, and I would say that is because of these people. But that's not all of it, right? Sometimes misinformation is out there, and misinformation can actually spread just as easily as true information, even in the presence of counterspeech. So I have some colleagues, Adrian Frigeri, Lada Adamek, Dean Eccles, and Justin Cheng, who basically what they did is they looked at rumor cascades on Facebook. And what they did, the way that they did this, I thought was very clever. They just looked for URLs that anywhere on Facebook had a comment that included a link to Snopes.com. So if you've never visited Snopes, Snopes is a site that's, the whole purpose is myth busting effectively, right? So there's some rumor going around on the internet, this site is there and it tells you whether that rumor is true or false, right? And so now that they know that this URL somebody somewhere has tagged this URL as being a rumor, go look at the Snopes article, they can actually say, okay, well, this original URL is rumor, it's a false information. And so they looked at the spread of these URLs. And this is actually the spread of a single false URL. I believe this, basically, there was a receipt in which it was printed up and it looked like they had been taxed for Obamacare on their gun purchase, is what it looked like from the receipt. Of course, this is not true, but it was extremely popular and spread very virally, right? And what they discovered, and this is the part that's a little disturbing, is that large cascades like this one were able to happen even though they accumulated hundreds of Snopes links, right? So even though they had lots of people, you know, posting comments saying, hey, this is not true, it still spread faster basically than people could kind of invalidate it. And so when you're you know, doing your data mining and looking at the symptoms of depression, noise is bad, and that's hard enough to deal with. But you also have bad information that can actually be very popular, right? So if you're trying to understand the relationship between people taking this drug and people, experiencing some symptom, if some rumor comes out that there's a correlation between taking aspirin and having seizures, and it's false, but it's very popular and it spreads very widely, then when you do your standard automatic mining of the social media data, you're going to see this huge signal that there's this correlation between aspirin and epilepsy, even though there's absolutely no basis for it. Right? And so as I said, noise is bad enough. False information is even worse. So to kind of wrap up this section, when you're doing this mining and you're thinking about whatever your particular problem is, right? Whatever the effect is that you're looking at, you want to ask these questions. Who is providing the information? Is the sharing of the information related to the person's identity, either as a cause or as an effect? Because that is going to influence who is sharing and the kind of sharing that's being done. Who does the source expect to be their audience? So, people actually, there's research that shows that people change the way that they present information depending on the audience that they expect to have. And so some people might, on Instagram, because it's all of their tween friends, they might kind of talk about how cool it is to be so conked out on whatever medication they're on. Whereas if they're sharing this information on Reddit, they might talk about the disastrous experience that they had on this medication because it's anonymous and they feel like it's a safe space. So thinking about who the audience is expected to be is going to be very important in terms of the kind of information that you expect to get when you're doing this mining. Similarly, what are the motivations for sharing? What are the norms around sharing this kind of information? If you see somebody talking about depression on Facebook, this means that they're sharing this information in the context of family and friends, and so maybe there's a certain kind of discussion that's going to happen there. Whereas if you see somebody talking about depression on Instagram or Snapchat or something like that, it might be a completely different kind of information that's actually being shared. And of course, the one thing that I didn't mention, number 4, is there an API to access the information? Scraping websites is hard and generally violates the terms of services. I highly recommend thinking about whether there's an API to access the information. Okay, so the next thing that I want to talk about, moving past sort of mining the social media information, is actually influencing the behavior. So if you're interested in sort of a research question, maybe you're using Twitter to do text mining to understand what people are talking about. But if you're a public health practitioner, maybe you actually want to get people to quit smoking. Maybe you actually want to get people to wash their hands more, brush their teeth more, what have you. And just like I did in the last section, I'm going to again start this section with a question from media research from the mid-1900s. In this case, it is from Katz and Lazarsfeld, their theory of the two-step flow of communication. Okay? So the quote that summarizes this is, "Ideas often flow from radio and print to opinion leaders, and from these to the less active sections of the population." And so basically what this is saying is that media doesn't affect people directly, generally, but rather it has its effect through the engaged people who then share this information with the less engaged people. Now, there's a lot of differences between kind of the social networks that were being studied in 1955 and the online social networks that we have now. Just to name a few, offline are much smaller, and basically there's Dunbar's number, which indicates that people tend to have a hard time maintaining, 150, more than 150 people, the social connections between more than 150 people. Whereas when you're online, you have these external resources that help you keep track of your 1,000 friends from kindergarten to grad school, right? In offline social networks, you're generally talking about higher energy relationships, higher social capital. These are the things, if you're seeing somebody face to face, these tend to be kind of stronger bonds because you have a higher bandwidth channel And whereas online social networks, yes, you still have the connections to your strong ties, but you also have many more connections to weaker ties. Offline, you have this higher bandwidth. Online, you have 140 characters. Offline, you tend to have much more dense networks. Online, you tend to have sparse, long, short path length. Like, there's lots and lots of differences, and these are very relevant when it comes to influencing people on social networks. Looking at this question, you see this quote, ideas often flow from radio and print, and I saw this and I'm like, well, really? I mean, I'm like snapping and I'm gramming and, radio and print? Okay. So in 2011, my colleagues and I, Xiaomei Wu, Jake Hoffman, and Duncan Watts, decided that we wanted to see whether this still held in social media. Is there a two-step flow in social media? And so to do this, we classified Twitter users into 4 categories: media, celebrity, organization, and blog. And the way that we did this is people can make Twitter lists. So they organize Twitter users into lists. And so basically, we just looked for lists that included celebrity or celebrities or media, news, these sorts of things, organizations, charities, and then blogs. And just to give you a sense of the kinds of accounts that we got, A+K, this is back when Ashton Kutcher was the most popular celebrity on Twitter, which is no longer true. Lady Gaga, The Ellen Show. In news, we had CNN and New York Times. So clearly this was effective in capturing these elite users. We're calling them elite users because even though they're media accounts and that sort of thing, they're still users in the same context as any other. There's no special treatment for public figures on Twitter other than the blue check mark. And so the question that we asked is, what fraction of a random user's follower set and tweets come from these elite users? Right? So on the x-axis here, this is friends, right? So amongst a random user's friends, when we look at the top 4,000 elite users in these categories, the average user has about 30% of their friends come from these top 4,000 accounts that we found. And in fact, amongst the 20,000, when you go out to the 20,000 elite users that we crawled, which represents less than 0.5% or 0.05% of the user population, almost 50% of attention, i.e. tweets received, come from these 20,000 users. Right? So the distribution of information on Twitter is extremely skewed, and the media or these elite users are a huge force in this. So what we did is we randomly sampled 1 million users. And over 230 days, we found that only 15% of media-originated URLs, that is to say URLs that were originally shared by these elite media accounts that we found, came actually directly from the media sources. Instead, most people got their URLs through an intermediary. That is to say, some friend retweeted this URL from the original media account. And these intermediaries actually tended to receive a lot more media-originated URLs on average than the random sample. And so basically what this suggests is that even in social media, there is the 2-step flow, but now it's 3-step, 4-step, or 17-step flow. So basically, the point is that when it comes to changing people's behavior, although these media accounts, although these popular people are commanding all of the attention, their information is getting out, a lot of this is actually coming through friends. So friends are actually very important when it comes to influence. So the original models of social influence and social networks come from actually epidemiological models, right? They've got the contact rate, reproduction rate, and at a course level this works. So the number of exposures influences this. You can apply this model to things like adopting new technologies, the spread of URLs, the spread of memes. And these all fit into the model actually fairly well. However, it's worth noting that ideas are not viruses, right? And in fact, this works for some things, but certainly not for others. So there's a lot of different things in psychology that I would love to talk about. So compliance versus conformity. This is to say, are you just going along because somebody told you had to do it, or are you actually changing your beliefs in response to it? When you are influenced, a lot of the reason why you change is because you have a goal of accuracy. I want to be correct. What you're telling me sounds more correct. I'm going to believe what you're saying. Affiliation. I want to be closer to you, so I'm just going to go along with what you're saying because I want to be closer to you. Or I want to feel good about myself, and so what you're telling me makes me feel good about myself, and so I'm going to do that. But the thing that I want to really focus on here is informational versus normative influence. And so the difference here is informational is, oh, I didn't realize that the iPod is better than the Zune. I will get the iPod, right? It's actually you see the statistics, it's the facts, you are receive information and you're influenced in that way. Normative influence is, oh, this is what people like me are doing. I am a person like me, so I'm going to do that too, right? And basically when it comes to the epidemiological model, the difference is between, is it multiple exposures that is changing your behavior, or is it exposure from multiple sources? So simple contagion, which are the things that I talked about, URLs spreading, kind of just the general meme spreading, this tends to be information. I had never seen that funny cat video before. That's new information. I'm going to share it, right? I've been influenced. I didn't realize that smoking causes cancer. I know this now. I'm going to stop smoking, right? But a lot of things are actually this complex contagion, which is normative influence. And so this is, oh, I see that everybody is doing this. I'm going to kind of follow along with what everybody else are doing. So this absolutely applies to things like adopting new technologies that have network effects. So the first person to get a fax machine probably felt really stupid, right? Because there was nobody to send a fax to, right? So it's only when you know that 5 of your friends have fax machines that you're actually going to get one yourself. But this also applied to Facebook, right? I mean, people didn't want to switch over to Facebook until they knew that all of their friends were also on Facebook. Another thing that follows this is actually social and linguistic conventions. I don't know if you remember when radical was on fleek, but it was. So we actually studied a linguistic convention like this regarding retweeting. So prior to the retweet button, so prior to 2009, the way that people would indicate the source and that they were copy-pasting a source was by using some linguistic convention. For instance, RT at so-and-so, right? That was the normal convention, right? But that wasn't how it started. And so we decided to study this because we knew that we had all of the instances of this, because we actually had data, or near complete data, from March 2006, very close to when Twitter began, to September 2009, shortly before the retweet button was introduced. So this is 54 million users, 1.9 billion tweets, 1.7 billion follow links, where the follow was actually a snapshot of the network. And what we did is we looked for all instances of some token @ username. And what we found were these were sort of the most popular ones over the entire data set, and I'm looking at adoptions as having ever used it. And so RT had the most number of adopters, the most number of retweets, followed by VIA, the full word retweeting, the full word retweet, HT, R/T, and then the recycle symbol. Okay, so we looked at all of these, and we looked at how these kind of emerged and spread. And there's a lot of results on this that I'm not going to go into, but what I did want to talk about was the diffusion network. So in this case, every adopter is a node in the graph, and there's a link from A to B if A was exposed to this particular variation by B. So when we look at the diffusion network of, okay, this should be going, yes, okay. So you see, okay, there's some new instances of it. Some of these we just don't have the edges for, but you start to see very quickly, it starts to spread. The network becomes very dense. And in fact, you do have some communities, but this is just the first 500 people that used RT. And in the end, the network of these people that first used RT were very dense. So the average number of exposures before somebody was actually used the convention was between 3 to 6. The average clustering coefficient of this whole network is relatively high. We can skip that. But the important part is the criticality. So this is, let's take out one user from this diffusion of the convention. We take out one person, and how many people are removed. And so the more people that are removed, the more critical that node is for the diffusion of this linguistic convention. And the most critical user, at most, you lose 5%, right? And the reason that this is true is because there's no single critical user, basically, right? And this is because it is a complex contagion. People weren't going to start using RT until they had a bunch of their friends that were using it. This complex contagion is also, the original study on complex contagion was actually about health behaviors. So when looking at when people, this was for logging kind of health behaviors on this website, and so the more health buddies a person had, the more likely that they were going to kind of continue using the site. So it was very much their involvement and their commitment to these health behaviors was enforced by the norm of their friends using this site. I'm going to skip that one and talk about this one. This is a study by Shakya, Christakis, and Fowler. And basically what they did is they looked at the friendships amongst people in this rural Indian village and looked at, in this particular diagram, the placement and the coloring is just community detection algorithm, modularity maximization. But the circles are people that own latrines. Right, so the squares are people that do not own latrines, and you notice that there is some very big norms or clustering within these communities regarding whether you own a latrine or not. And so, in fact, what this suggests is that in order to get people in rural India to start using latrines and having a personal latrine that they use, is going to be through changing the social norms or pushing groups of people that are connected to adopt. And so basically what I want to say is that when it comes to the media, government organizations, these large things, sharing public health information and trying to influence people's public health behaviors, the direct influence doesn't happen that often. And much more often, the influence is going to be coming through friends, because a lot of health behaviors, most health behaviors, fit into this category of things that require complex contagion, things that require normative influence in order for people to actually change their behaviors. And so by tapping into friends, you can reach these people that are maybe not connected to NIH or CDC, but are connected to people that are connected to them, right? By tapping into friend networks, you can actually make normative influence possible. You can actually get people on board as a group and do targeted, network-targeted experiments and influences. And then what I didn't talk about, but there's this friend paradox, which is actually true, which is that if the average person, a person has, I always get this difficult, here we go. Your friends are more popular than you are, right? Which is to say that you take an average person and their friends will on average have more friends than they will. This is actually just a mathematical consequence of having a scale-free social network, but it's also actually true. I have some colleagues that looked at followers, activity on Twitter, virality, that is to say like how far your tweets go, like how often your tweets are retweeted. And they found that for all of these things, your friends are more active, more viral, and have more followers than you do, right? This site by Garcia Herranz and colleagues shows that basically you can leverage this, so you recruit somebody and then you recruit their friend. And you ask their friend to say, hey, let me know if you see anybody that's coughing and has flu-like symptoms. right? And because of this friendship paradox, by getting the person's friend, you're getting somebody that is going to be, on average, more central, more connected, have more friends. And so when you're designing things to actually induce public health behaviors, this is actually a very good strategy. Again, you're tapping into the friend network, and you're actually leveraging this to get more network central people. At a broad stroke, basically my two main takeaways here is when you're doing social media mining for public health information, be mindful of the people, motivations, and context for sharing when you look at your data. And second, if you're trying to design interventions to affect public health, try to leverage those friend networks because there's lots of advantages that come from that. So, thank you. Questions?
Thank you so much. And there's time for a few questions. Please try to use the mics in the center so that everyone can hear you. Sorry to make you get up.
It's really, I think, useful. Thinking about the social network mining talks we heard earlier, I think several of them could benefit from this sort of mindset. I want to try and take you in a more speculative direction about the influencing social behavior stuff. One of the things I found most interesting in the news in the last year about social media was the use of Ashley Madison's bots. So the artificial engagement with people really drove actual engagement. It really kept people involved in the system. And so I'm curious what you think, or if there's any evidence about whether artificial bot-like things out on social networks might be useful in trying to affect behaviors.
I think that I think that the Ashley Madison bots are sketchy. Using that sort of approach is I think, sketchy because people don't know that they're interacting with a bot. And so I think that there's ethical questions there. But I think there's lots of examples of people interacting with things they know are bots. There was this thing a while back called Horse eBooks. I don't know if anybody knows this, but basically it was a Twitter account that was a bot that just tweeted random words, and every once in a while they were kind of poetic or hilarious. And so it was just this like bot that people were interacting with. So, there was in one of the talks earlier, there was the idea of, the smoking cessation thing where people are saying, hey, I would love to have some sort of a reminder, So I think that as long as people are aware that they're interacting with a bot, I think that there's lots of opportunities there.
Okay.
Can I ask a question about the so one thing that you did talk about that I think is a really neat possibility here is forming research cohorts, going in, finding people who could qualify for a study, a clinical study, and then get them to team up and say, share interests like women with breast cancer or mothers with kids with epilepsy, or you name it, but now very rapid, large-scale group formations that could work in positive ways. If you could input some positive help around it, and then get some people who want to research in that group. Now you're going to be providing the kinds of numbers for rapid testing of different approaches in a way that has never been possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's two approaches to this. One that I think is okay, and one that isn't. And so the sketchy approach is, I have detected that you probably have breast cancer. Let me ask you whether you want to participate in this, right? I don't think that that's a good approach. But what you find is that people are self-organizing in this way already, and so you see the forums that you're shaking your head. I just feel like it's one of these. I mean, if it's not a sensitive issue, perhaps, but if it's anything, most health issues are sensitive, and so anything where you have a kind of unknown entity coming in and saying, hey, I think you have this disease, or I think that you're suffering from this problem, is going to just raise so many red flags that it's just.
How different is that than you providing an ad in somebody's stream that is now based on stuff that they've done and it's things that they've said, which puts them potentially in a cohort that would have a higher likelihood of being interested in breast cancer research?
I don't think that like if you visit a site that is keeping track of cookies, if you visit a Breast Cancer Research Institute website and they're keeping track of cookies and advertising on Facebook, then that's possible. But the sort of defense there, I think, is that, or the reason why it's different is because it's not Facebook that's aware of that relationship, right? Whenever, I'm sure you all have had this experience where you go buy something on Amazon and then you come back to Facebook and you see the advertisement for the thing that you just bought, right? Well, the thing is that the way that works is that Amazon knows that you're logged into Facebook and so has your Facebook cookie and says, okay, associated to this cookie is this, Corningware. I want to advertise this Corningware to this cookie. Facebook has no idea about what the advertisement is or, what this relationship is, right? They're completely agnostic to it. And so I think that something where Facebook is actually intervening and actually, that information is not available to us. And so, doing other things with the information that is available to us, I think, poses a lot more kind of privacy challenges.
Thank you for the very interesting talk. I was curious about the latrines in India example and the conclusion that that you would probably get more people having latrines by social pressure or something. That I can imagine that same graph being a result of maybe geographical neighborhoods or where they went to school or something. And so I was wondering how you got that conclusion.
So I believe that this was actually a randomized controlled experiment that they did.
Oh, okay. So they actually had friends, influenced friends.
Exactly.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, that wasn't clear. Thank you.
Okay, so how much information could you extract from what people are buying online, from tracking shopping behavior on Amazon and eBay, and looking at the patterns of spending, looking at what people are if all of a sudden somebody's ordering a bunch of diapers and they're for kids, then it's probably they're going to have a kitty sometime, soon, or they have one already, that kind of stuff.
Oh, I mean, there's lots of information that is revealed through purchasing behavior, tons of information. That information is usually not just accessible.
Yeah,
right.
So that's the other question, how accessible it is, and does, say, the company itself, say Amazon, how much access do they have to, and how much de-anonymization they can, they have a lot of personal information, right? Do they do some kind of mining on it internally, if you know?
In the tech world, I have a pretty good sense of sort of what Google is doing with their data, what Yahoo does with their data, what Microsoft does with their data. Amazon is a black box. Mm-hmm. I really have no idea.
Okay, well,
yeah.
Thank you.
But yeah, absolutely. Although that actually came from, that was all internal, and it came from the Target shopper's card, right? And so yeah, that's a great example of, classic example of kind of the, yeah, sorry, thank you. So there's a classic kind of case study where basically this woman started buying prenatal vitamins and these sorts of things, and so using the Target shopper's card, and so advertisements then went to her home for diapers and these sorts of things because they had done data mining, the Target researchers had done data mining to discover that that when people buy prenatal vitamins, they're going to want to buy diapers soon. The downside, the privacy violation that happened here is that the father didn't know that his daughter was pregnant and then got this advertisement for the diapers and had some questions. So yes, this was an example of things going awry. It's funny because, she did need the diapers eventually. But I think that it's this sort of kind of privacy preserving thing is really tricky. I think it raises a really thorny question because You know, knowing, I think it's very hard. I think it would be very hard, even if this was a purely like human-operated system, to know that this was not a case where you should send kind of, you know, these coupons.
You could look at it like an opt-in strategy. That's what Google is doing with their cards. They say, are you interested in this topic, and they throw you cards which they seem to be related to some of your searches, and then you start getting an information piece that's related to those.
It's a lovely idea. The truth is that most people don't use that when they're given the option. Facebook has that option too. You can go through and see what sorts of things people, you know, what sorts of things advertisers can see about you. But, you know, even when you like put it in their face, and we have a little privacy dinosaur that allows you to walk through these sorts of things, and people just don't tend to use it.
So I have a question along the lines of privacy. I mean, there's so many social media accounts that you can keep private. How do you guys deal with that when you're, you know, when you are mining for data and there are so many accounts that people are private? Are you like, can you, I mean, obviously I don't think you can see them, but is there a concern that you're missing a significant group of people as you're looking for trends in data? Or is the private accounts not even something that's of concern?
Are you asking just in general when
so,
researchers
I mean, like when you were
are
talking about like some of the retweets, like on Twitter, you can have a private account where like you can't access somebody's tweets unless you follow them or unless you're given access to them. Same thing on Instagram or on Facebook. You can really like up those privacy, those settings. So if you're looking for somebody who has been tweeting about like their experience with a drug or something like that, and if you miss those, how do you sort of course correct for that, or is that not something that's big enough to affect what you're looking at?
That's a great question, and in fact, like there's sort of two aspects to that. So the first is absolutely just the people that in general have their privacy set, their posts set to always private, where if you're accessing through the public API, you'll never even know that they exist.
Right.
And unfortunately, it's kind of impossible to estimate that, right? Like how, to what extent does that exist, you know? Or at least not possible to estimate in any way that I know. And so it's one of these things where you have to recognize that Twitter is a convenience sample. The other part of it, though, which is kind of related to what I was talking about, is that you're also going to have people that, even though they're generally public, might self-censor on that particular topic, and that's another thing that's another whole swath that you're going to be missing. And again, it's hard to estimate that, but that's maybe a little bit more feasible to kind of get at because you can do surveys and you can actually ask people directly these sorts of things.
Okay, thank you.
Great talk. I really enjoyed it. I had a quick question about the timeline feature that Facebook has and kind of your thoughts about the future of this concept because, all right, so I guess my point is that my dad and my mom, I'm a young guy, 22, had Facebook for about 6 years now, and I think every time I go on Facebook, they tell me that I'm wasting my time. They tell me that how many hours a day do you spend on Facebook, Nick? Like 2 hours, 3 hours?
I spend way more time on Facebook than you. So
whatever it is. And so I love Facebook for the fact that it can connect me with my friends that I've gone to school all over the country here, and it's nice to have that connection. But I'm wondering what your thoughts are for this like timeline feature as being more than just a way to like see your life in the context of your friends, but also for us to like use the data that we collect over our lifetimes as a way to like enhance our understanding of behavior, lifestyle, health, well-being, all the things that we're kind of talking about here at this conference. I feel like that's something that's really important and something that clearly because you're here, it seems like Facebook kind of cares about it. So I was just wondering what you thought.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know about the timeline feature per se, but absolutely we're getting into the realm. I mean, Facebook's been around for 10 years, more than 10 years now. And so there's like, we're getting into the realm where we can start to look at these real longitudinal effects. Kind of related to your second point, we absolutely care about well-being. I have a researcher, Maura Burke, who's looking at that question now. And because we think that you know, the more that we understand the relationship between just, of course, generally Facebook use and well-being, but also just what are the correlates with well-being and these sorts of things, the better the service will be, right? And so that's, you know, so it sort of is a win-win in my mind, because it's helpful for the company, but it's also helpful for people if we can find ways to improve well-being.
So overall, where does health-related research rank in a social media company like Facebook? It's kind of a curiosity for people here, and an individual researcher might want to do it, but does a company like Twitter or Facebook see health as a sector in which it's something worth doing?
So there's a couple of different ways in which Facebook is interested in this. One of them is the one that I just talked about, which is, you know, our interest in ensuring there's sort of this long-term vision, right? If you want to be around as a company for 100 years, you want to make sure that you're helping your customers for 100 years, right? I mean, that's the way that it's going to work. And so making sure that your customers are healthy and happy. I mean, the mission of the company is to make the world a more open and connected place. This is the mantra that's, like, you know, taught to us as employees, right? Make the world a more open and connected place. But what's really amazing is that there's true efforts in this, and there's a real belief. I mean, when you talk from like top down, when you talk to any employee, you really hear actually kind of an implicit belief in this. And it's something that's a little weird. It kind of feels like you're drinking the Kool-Aid, right? It's a little, you know, but it's also kind of inspiring, because you see that the people are really caring about the way that they can help people. And so one of these, you know, the internet.org has come under some fire recently because of net neutrality and this sort of thing. But and it's a complicated issue, but what I feel this like confidence, because I know that these people are trying to actually, you know, there's evidence that connecting people to the internet improves, just on average improves their situation in life. You know, and so the more that we can enable this, you know, the better that we can actually help people kind of out of hard situations. There's I don't know if it's still alive, but there was peace.facebook.com, which was just about sort of, you know, friendships that across governments that are currently battling. Right? And so there's like, you know, I feel like there's a lot of efforts towards helping people. Now, the specific like health question, I think that the question of like helping people's well-being and that sort of thing is a current priority. But something that more particular, it does tend to be, we've got this one researcher that's interested in it, and they're going to make that their project, and they're going to work on it. Or maybe we collaborate with an academic because we've got this researcher that's interested in it, and so we're going to do some collaboration along this way. But it doesn't tend to be, it's not like, aside from the more broad company goal of making the world a more open and connected place, it's not something that's kind of has as much salience and visibility. One more? One more.
Thanks. So you've given us 4 questions that we should be asking. I'm wondering what you think is the biggest impact of those questions. So maybe I should rephrase the question as, what are we doing wrong? Obviously, we're starting to do social media mining, and different researchers are coming at it from the perspective of their different communities, whether it's natural language processing or network analysis or what have you, and they're not trained in the kind of social psychology aspects of it. And so, you know, what would your advice be to those of us who are coming from those other disciplines in thinking about this problem?
So, I mean, I actually think that you really can just get a lot by thinking about these questions when you're doing your initial data analysis, right? Or even research design. And is it going to, is that the end of it? No, but that's going to get you a good bit of the way, right? To think about this, and sometimes, honestly, it's going to be as simple as like, okay, I recognize that this is a problem. I know that there's these like anonymous accounts that I'll never be able to get to, and you just accept that, okay, well, something's better than nothing. A lot of the times that's the way that it ends up, right? It's like, okay, well, I've thought about these questions and there's not much that I can do about it, but at least I'm aware of it. And so that's going to sort of guide the way that you write about your results, the way that you think about your conclusions, the way that you think about your next steps, right? And so just thinking about these questions at the beginning, even if it doesn't change what you're doing, maybe gives you a kind of bigger picture. Kind of going further, okay, it's not just these 4 questions. There's a lot of social psychological research on things like sharing, on things like disclosure, self-disclosure, these sorts of things. And honestly, I would highly recommend just connecting with people that are researching it. There's good social psychologists at every university. Just grab a cup of coffee with one of them and kind of ask their opinion on it.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Winter, for giving a great talk, and would everyone else welcome or help me in thanking him. Thank you.
Thank you.